Hello, Heterodox Academy, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Hannah Wolfman-Jones, and I am a mother and a Bitcoiner. I enjoy speaking and writing about ideas and issues that are important to me. I recently wrote a book, System Override: How Bitcoin, Blockchain, Free Speech, and Free Tech Can Change Everything, which contains a wonderful contribution by one of Heterodox Academy's own advisors, Nadine Strawson. You can find out more at wetheweb.org. Today I'll be presenting the theory that there is a bias in academia and the economic body of research and theories it produces in favor of supporting a fiat or government-managed monetary system. Evidence for this comes from academia's lack of people with the economic experiences, values, perspectives, and personalities that frequently lead people to Bitcoin. Academia and economists also have prestige, power, and financial incentives to support a fiat system. Please note that I am not indicting any particular professor. I am simply arguing that academia as a whole, with all the professors and research considered together, is hugely biased against Bitcoin. Bitcoiners, including myself, are also hugely biased with financial, reputational, and emotional ties to Bitcoin. If academia was full of mostly Bitcoiners, we would also have a problem, but that is not the case. Bitcoiners are actually grossly underrepresented. So why Bitcoin specifically? Well, Bitcoin is a set of rules without rulers. It's just a protocol. Bitcoin is unique among cryptocurrencies in that it is laser focused on being unstoppable through decentralization and game theory, and consistent in supply schedule, economic and consensus rules, uptime, and treatments of participants. There are no favorites in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is by far the least stoppable and most consistent money that can be used online due to its decentralization, network effects, developmental stage, ethos, and lack of leadership. So this slide shows different financial and economic systems and the degree to which they are managed and controlled by a central entity. As you can see, Bitcoin is the least controlled of all, specifically Bitcoin held by the owner, rather than held on behalf of the owner by an exchange or other financial service. So who sees value in Bitcoin? Well, the developing world leads in interest. People who are discriminated against in the current financial system see value. Hard money and free market fans, cypherpunks, and traders all get into Bitcoin. And these groups are hugely underrepresented in academia, leading to a large gap in understanding as to what Bitcoin is and why people value it. The following experiences are very common among Bitcoiners, but very much lacking in academics. One is a first-hand experience of hyperinflation. People who have experienced that don't need any explanation as to why a 21 million cap on the number of Bitcoin could be a very good thing. Also, sending and receiving remittances. The developing world often has huge fees through things like Western Union. Financial exclusion. So the developing world has a huge percentage who are unbanked and thus can't access online commerce and investment opportunities. Also international sanctions. So imagine you're a good, hard-working person born in Iran. You would very much appreciate the permissionless nature of Bitcoin. Also nations suffering under oppressive global monetary policies appreciate it. So that's why Bitcoin is most popular in the developing world, particularly Latin America, where it's gaining significant political steam, and Africa, which consistently leads in per capita Google searches for Bitcoin. Though it's not very commonly taught in academia, Bitcoiners are very aware of the Cantillon effect. So very briefly, the Cantillon effect is the idea that those who receive new money added to the economy first benefit the most. While the mechanisms for adding new money is typically done by the Fed buying bonds and completely digital, it is commonly referred to as simply printing money. Bitcoiners believe that when the money printer goes burr, as they call it, Those new dollars inevitably end up benefiting people close to the printing, namely big businesses, wealthy individuals, and more powerful nations. Bitcoiners frequently point to the increased inequality following money printing in response to the 2008 financial crisis and COVID as evidence of this effect. Many in the developing world view the global fiat system as keeping them from developing. So this is Lord Fusitawa. He is a member of parliament in Tonga, a small island nation with 106,000 residents and a very low level of economic development. He explains, quote, "The IMF and the World Bank's entire purpose is to entrench that global fiat system and to bring as many countries under the bondage of that system as possible. So what they do is for the developing world, they give out loans and then they force austerity measures on that country so that it's impossible for you to pay back the loan. You end up in a cycle of debt. The IMF and the World Bank ensnare the developing world and keep them mired as primary industries, either plantations or mines, to serve the first world with primary raw goods, which the developing world then turns into manufactured goods and sells back at a profit. All traditional Keynesian trained economists were trained by the universities in the West to go back and enslave their own countries to the tyranny of the Western central banks." Lord Fusitawa is far from the only one thinking this way. A huge percentage of the people in El Salvador feel this way. A supermajority of their legislators voted on June 9th to make Bitcoin their nation's legal currency in addition to the US dollar. President Nayib Bukele explains, quote, "In 2001, we adopted the US dollar as legal tender. Now we adopt Bitcoin. The difference is that then it was probably done for the good of the banks. Today, it is done for the good of the people. Some banks may be upset about El Salvador adopting Bitcoin, but they are not taking care of the 70% of our people who don't even have a bank account. It's not like we're doing good in the old system. Why not try something new that isn't handled by anybody, instead of being in the hands of somebody that could decide your monetary future from one day to another without consulting you or without caring about what's going to happen to your people? Why not the system that is open and free?" So thus far, we've discussed how economic experiences can lead people to Bitcoin, but there are also economic beliefs that do. Many Bitcoiners believe, as Hayek did, that, quote, "To act on the belief that we possess the knowledge and the power which enable us to shape the processes of society entirely to our liking, knowledge which in fact we do not possess, is likely to make us do much harm." Many Bitcoiners view governments and their central economic planners as coercive monopolies on force, whose policies are very frequently catastrophic for powerless people, as shown in the lower left. They view free markets, on the other hand, as voluntary and peaceful, and the best engines for prosperity and positively impacting the world. Given these views, Bitcoiners are unlikely to become university economists, since they believe that trying to model and control an economy to be futile. Instead, they enter the free market. Many Bitcoiners are also very against the inflationary aspect of fiat money. They view inflation as stealing from people to further consolidate wealth in an owning and governing class. Meanwhile, the policies trap workers, or wages as they call them online, in unfulfilling jobs that they can never leave, as they are never given the opportunity to own something on their own. Inflation punishes savers and workers, since wages often don't keep up, while pumping assets and thus helping the already wealthy who own those assets. Inflation also greatly increases the reach of governments, something Bitcoiners don't want. This slide shows some quotes from that Bitcoiners generally find highly disconcerting and immoral, but are fairly popular views among academics. So top left, that's Stephanie Kelton. She's the main thought leader behind modern monetary theory. She says, quote, "The taxpayer, according to the conventional view, is at the center of the monetary universe because of the belief that the government has no money of its own, but in reality is the government's money," end quote. Bitcoiners don't like this. They don't trust the government to provide for them comfortably in their retirement and their health care and know how to, raise their children correctly and just take care of everything, and just, they'll work their minimum wage job and just trust that everything will be figured out. They want to plan for their own future and secure some wealth of their own. Here's Neil Kashkari of the Federal Reserve stating, quote, "There's no end to our ability to flood the system with money," end quote. So indicating more inflation is coming. Christine Lagarde says that, quote, "We should be happier to have a job than to have our savings protected." She's the president of the European Central Bank. In the wagie's view, she's keeping him as a wagee and not allowing him to move into her owning class. And here's the World Economic Forum. They have a report where they say that by 2030, ordinary people won't own anything. So you'll own nothing, but they assure us that we'll be happy. Bitcoiners also tend to believe that the current financial system is all rigged against ordinary people. By contrast, Bitcoin does not know if you are the head of the Federal Reserve or a teen from Nigeria. It treats all equally. One event that exemplified this, creating lots of new Bitcoin proponents, was the GameStop Wall Street bets fiasco at the start of this year. Lots of small and powerless retail investors banded together on the Reddit forum Wall Street Bets to execute a short squeeze against hedge funds who had overly shorted GameStop to the tune of 140%. Wall Street Bets hoped to save GameStop and get rich doing it by buying up GME shares on the retail trading app Robinhood. They succeeded, but then Robinhood unilaterally changed the rules of the game on them to favor the hedge funds. Robinhood set the stock to sell only for retail investors, while allowing the hedge funds, the shorters, to be the sole buyers. This obviously made it easier for the hedge funds to buy up the shares required to close the short at a lower price, and greatly hurt the powerless retail investors. Needless to say, people were mad, particularly when many in the government indicated an unwillingness to stand up for the retail investors and even threatened them with charges of market manipulation for discussing stocks online. Here is some of the Bitcoiners' responses. So on the left, this is Jen Psaki, Biden White House spokesperson, responding to a reporter who says, "GameStop is a big story." And Psaki says, "I know it's a big story. Our focus and our big story is getting the American people back to work." So here is a triggered Bitcoin pleb, who happens to be me, translating her words as such, quote, "Back to work, wages. Leave the making money and investments to the smart money. We don't care that the 1% break the rules of the market the moment plebs win at the hedge fund's own shell games. Market manipulation is okay for pros." Cameron Winklevoss, a Bitcoiner who owns a cryptocurrency exchange, states, quote, "Clearinghouses are faceless organizations run by the suits and the banks. They can move the goalposts and shut off one side of the market at a moment's notice. No transparency, endless plausible deniability. Exhibit A, GameStop, AMC, NLK, etc. Decentralized finance fixes this." Crypto Daily, a Bitcoin YouTuber, states, quote, "The financial world is rigged. Cartels have conspired together to protect their own interests at the expense of the retail investor. This has created the ultimate backdrop for why the world needs Bitcoin, the best version of the people's money that exists." So Bitcoiners are generally much more distrustful of governments, regulation, authorities, and financial institutions than academics. As one example, academics tend to trust AML KYC laws, or anti-money laundering, know your customer laws, as being done in good faith. They tend to discuss how, not whether, to bring Bitcoin and open blockchains under AML KYC laws. Bitcoiners, on the other hand, widely believe AML KYC laws are a poverty trap, Orwellian surveillance system incompatible with a free society, a competition killer, a financial censorship tool, and generally just a corrupt sham. Oops. Bitcoiners do have some evidence for this. They point to a huge trove of secret documents that was leaked in September 2020 from FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which revealed that regulators were allowing banks to facilitate large-scale crimes. As BuzzFeed explained, quote, laws that were meant to stop financial crime have instead allowed it to flourish. So long as a bank files a notice that it may be facilitating criminal activity, it all but immunizes itself and its executives from criminal prosecution. The suspicious activity alert effectively gives them a free pass to keep moving the money and collecting the fees. In the rare instances when the US government does crack down on banks, it often relies on sweetheart deals called deferred prosecution agreements, which include fines but no high-level arrest. Even after they were prosecuted or fined for financial misconduct, banks continue to move money for suspected criminals. So the developing world also views AML KYC laws as highly immoral and trapping them in poverty. This is a group of El Salvadorians who are trying to bring Bitcoin to the nation, and they state, quote, AML KYC laws have been even more disastrous for the poor than the war on drugs. It is time to stop forcing billions of the most vulnerable to pay the price for laws that do very little to deter crime. AML KYC laws keep the poor locked out of the financial system and put up significant roadblocks for them to escape poverty. These laws, foisted on them by the US, are one of the big reasons the poor remain unbanked and pay much higher fees for financial services than the wealthy. El Salvador has a national ID, and most adults have one. It's not just an ID that most banks require. They also want formal proof of income in order to comply with US-pushed KYC AML laws. Most people work in the informal sector. Poor customers are not worth the risks to banks. So, the US thinks it's racist to require its relatively wealthy citizens to have ID to vote. The US also threatens developing countries with sanctions if they allow impoverished citizens without ID access to financial services. Then they lecture said countries for being poor. So one of the groups that's the biggest supporters of Bitcoin and also credited with creating the technology behind it are the cypherpunks and closely associated ideologies. So cypherpunks believe that cryptography can be a great tool for social good, for benefiting society, specifically for overcoming the tyranny of governments. And they tend to be libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists. They are heavily persecuted by the state. They can't and don't trust institutions. They often oppose the powerful, for example, whistleblowers like Julian Assange, who has revealed more war crimes and corruptions than any other journalist of our time through WikiLeaks, and Edward Snowden, who has won awards for bringing to light the NSA spying operation. They also highly value individual sovereignty, privacy, and free speech, and many contribute code anonymously. All of the men pictured on this slide have been or are or may be imprisoned by U.S. authorities soon. But many in connection with failing to comply with AML KYC. But unlike banks, Bitcoiners get no sweetheart deals and are very harshly prosecuted. For example, Ross Albright, who you see sitting on grass at the top there, was convicted for running a permissionless marketplace, but charged with no violent crimes, and is currently serving more time than the hugely violent cartel leader, El Chapo. Meanwhile, no one from HSBC, who banked El Chapo, faces criminal penalties. The U.S. is now poised to pass an infrastructure bill that imposes AML KYC requirements on individuals supporting Bitcoin infrastructure through mining, running nodes, and contributing code. These laws are literally impossible to comply with and criminalize a lot of normal people. The law, of course, will not stop Bitcoin, but it will stop law-abiding Americans from fully participating in the growing Bitcoin network. Academia also has a revolving door with organizations such as the Federal Reserve, the World Economic Forum, World Bank, and and as advisors to various governments. This confers prestige and influence to professors, as well as huge financial rewards. Bitcoin takes away most of academic economists' ability to influence the monetary system, greatly reducing their relevance, prestige, power, and thus funding. It also threatens their standing as experts because academic economists typically do not have any background in computer science or cryptography, something necessary to be a true expert in Bitcoin. As trusted experts, academic economists are the managers of the global fiat system, and thus often quite blind to the drawbacks and risks inherently associated with trusting our monetary system to fallible central managers at all, something that Bitcoiners are hyper aware of. There are also financial incentives to the universities to support the fiat system. These come from benefits that the university gets from easy money policies in the form of government grants for research and in tuition money, since inflationary environments favor debtors and universities rely on student debt. The economists and papers academia produces are thus likely biased in support of inflationary fiat systems. Again, this is not an indictment of professors. Every group of people, if they have a financial incentive to think a certain way, they tend to lean that way as a group. And that's just a principle of how humans are. The following personality and perspective differences also exist between Bitcoiners and academics. Bitcoiners lean much more libertarian, versus academics. They have very low respect for hierarchies, credentials, and authorities. They follow don't trust, verify ethos, so they don't look at the credentials of the person saying it. Instead, they look at the thing being said. Whereas academia is in itself a credentialing system and obviously has lots of hierarchies and confers authority to people who achieve things within academic ranks. Bitcoiners also tolerate a very high level of harshness of speech that universities do not. They have a strong desire for privacy and personal autonomy that you can't get within the university system. And they're also internet natives so people who grew up and are very at home online and in online communities versus digital immigrants who are kind of came in later in life and might not understand the nature of online communities quite as well. So thank you so much for having me. I think this is a wonderful organization and I'm so grateful to talk to you all. I hope this was informative, and here are some discussion questions to consider. Thank you.